Good evening. I'm Wendy Hudson.
I'm Mary Haft.
And we are the co-founders of the Nantucket Book Festival.
And I'm just going to start by saying it was all Wendy's idea. She talked about this with me for a while. Like, there should be a book festival on Nantucket. Why isn't there a book festival on Nantucket?
Well, as the island's bookseller, if you haven't heard me say this yet, I'm the proprietress of Mitchell's and Bookworks, and it's kind of a no-brainer. The island had a wine festival, we had film, obviously fantastic things, but of course we needed to celebrate books. So we want to welcome you all here. Shall I just do my quick little remarks? Okay. First and foremost, we thank all our donors, et cetera, but I really want to thank each and every one of you for coming, and each and every reader out there. And there's so many faces that come year to year, and and so many readers. I was laughing because 15 years already. This was the little notebook that I had to jot down all my book fest ideas and who to contact and who could maybe help and what authors I could call in. And look how tattered this thing is. It's like an antique, which is making me feel extremely old. But it had things like, kind of some of the very early things that we don't always talk about. I do mention Wendy Schmitz, her seed money really got us going. We don't always mention Jean Halberstam, but she was the one who always insisted that we take great care of our authors. So, if the authors are having a good time, we've succeeded, and that was something she was adamant about. And if anyone remembers Jean, she was extremely adamant. So shout out to Jean. The last little one I wanted to mention, not so little, is the Community Foundation of Nantucket. So when before we became our own 501c3, we needed an umbrella. So Margaretta Andrews was super instrumental there. And I'm very proud now to serve on that board. And I just kind of want to say, the Community Foundation is an incredible organization. And if anybody has ideas such as this that they want to see happen in the community, come talk to Sunny Daly, the wonderful executive director, and good ideas can happen, and there's so many people in the community that help and want to make it happen. So that was my 2 cents. Mary, you can thank everybody else.
Well, I also want to thank Joe Karp, because you and I and Megan, I think that was one of our first steps, is to sit down with Joe Karp. We were at the White Elephant, we're telling her this idea, and she was immediately in. And the White Elephant has been our wonderful sponsor every year since. We have an amazing Friday night dinner for all the authors, which she hosts, and we're only missing her this night. She is not with us this year, but she is well, healthy, and happy, but not able to be with us. But we thank Joe Karp so much. The other thanks, and I think... The other thanks, and I think what most people wouldn't understand, because really we have built an amazing organization, but it is built so much on the backs of talent and time given by so many individuals. In all these years, we have had one full-time staffer. Imagine all of this. That means we have a lot of people who said, I care about this, I'm going to dedicate my time and talent. We have an extraordinary group of people from our very beginnings. We have a board of directors that are with us today. We have teachers, librarians. So could everyone who has been involved with us, everyone's had an oar in. We are here because everyone has had an oar in and rowed us to this shore of 15 years. So everyone who has been involved with us in any capacity, volunteer, festival board, anything, please stand up and take a bow. I see. So 15 years ago, we gathered around this simple but enduring belief that words matter, that words have power to enlarge, enlighten, and inspire, that stories can bring us together in shared experience. Through the pages of a book, we can enter a world not known, step into shoes in a life we could never have experienced. And we can walk a road that leads us to a destination previously unexplored, and that is what reading can do. In a world divided, it is stories that explore this complex and beautifully diverse world that help us to understand that what pulls us together is our shared humanity. I believe in the human spirit, the will to live, the will to love. It is human to long for connection and community. We are bound by our human history. We are reminded we belong to each other. So walk with us into these amazing days of celebrating our writers and their amazing work. And now, walking into all of our lives at the Nantucket Book Festival is our co-chair and board member, Sara DiVello. She is like the ever-ready battery brought to life. She is always stepping in, stepping up. Any gap, she is there. She's like putting her fingers in every single little dike that we have, always with bright eyes and a welcoming smile. And it has just been joy to welcome Sara into our fold. So welcome, Sara.
Right. Well, I first got involved in the festival in 2014 when I was invited as an author. I was invited back in 2023, and then I just was so blown away by this festival. I kept showing up. They couldn't get rid of me. So when they invited me to be Mary's co-chair and then to serve on the board, I said yes. And it was a full-body, wholehearted yes, because I'm at a point in my life where if it's not a full-bodied, wholehearted yes, it is a hell no. And that's just the way it is. So this is a yes for me, because to gather here in bookish community at a time when 13% of children read for pleasure, when more and more books are being banned daily, and our time and our attention are being pulled in 1,000 urgent directions, to be in a room with hundreds of other book lovers who understand the magic of books and the power of books as a roadmap forward through the darkness to the light, even if we ourselves have not traveled that path, it's a yes. It's a yes for me. And I love that we are standing here with Mary and Wendy, who 16 years ago were at the Nantucket Project, and Wendy leaned over and said, we should start a book festival. And Mary said yes. And we are all here today because of them. So we should never underestimate two women who have a vision and the will to get us there. I want to thank both of them who have continued to row with almost unparalleled, amazing strength for two tiny blondes to get us here every year, and to Jill Karp, who nourishes us and feeds us at the White Elephant, and who has an incredible eye for books and is a scarily voracious reader. I love that sassy Jersey girl, and she's not here with us tonight, but she is here with us in spirit. So I want to thank all of them, and I want to thank our largest donors, the Boston Globe and the White Elephant, who make this possible. You know, for me, I grew up in a family like Adriana and Appalachia, in a family that could not afford books. And books were those roadmap for me out of that road, which was a tough one. So every 2 weeks, we would go to the library and we would fill our grocery bags with books, and I would go home and I would read about little girls like me who had come from tougher situations and somehow found a way forward. And those books became for me the roadmap forward. Education was the path, and somehow I find myself here with all of you. So I am so thrilled to be part of this team that understands the power of books, and to be in rooms where ideas are discussed openly and where we share learning about climate, about the climate crisis, about different paths that are of people who are other than us, but who we find empathy and connection and empowerment with. So my friend Dorothy is a 7th generation Nantucketer, part indigenous, and she says, the gray lady calls those who she wants and let those who she does not want flow out with the tide. And we have all been called here. Every single one of us has been called here, and we have come by sea and by sky from near and far to gather in bookish community, to open our minds, expand our hearts, learn empathy, compassion, share knowledge, and it is a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. I am excited to introduce you to Adam Nee, who is our new executive director. I was part of the search committee that found Adam, and we interviewed many candidates. He was the first, which I think is always a challenge because we think, could we do better? The answer with Adam was no. No one could be better than Adam. He set the bar so high that even as we interviewed so many other candidates, no one was as funny, as smart, as passionate about books as Adam. He is one of the funniest people I've ever met. And when he shares his love of books and how he read to his daughter growing up, and now she's gone to college, and he wants to share that love of books with other people and other kids, we said yes to Adam. So Adam Nee, welcome to the stage.
You know the phrase, a tough act to follow? I don't know what was harder to follow, the speech or the introduction, but I'll do my best. So I am Adam Nee. I'm the executive director of the Nantucket Book Foundation, a recovering executive director. I don't know if anyone was in the church earlier. It was a little warm, but it's normal to change clothes 3 times a day, right? We all did that? Yeah. So I'm usually a pretty off-the-cuff person, but because I want to make sure I hit all of the important points, I do have some notes here. So this is, as Sara said, my first Nantucket Book Festival, first time in this position. And really what drew me to this group is its mission, this foundation's mission, which is promoting and celebrating the transformative power of the written word and building a community of readers and writers year-round on Nantucket and beyond, and programming that is free for all. You know, can we applaud free for all? Yeah. You are all responsible for it being free for all, so thank you. And then what really sealed the deal for me was the incredibly passionate, supportive, and hardworking board I'd be working with, which you've already been introduced to. You don't put on a 4-day festival without care, tenacity, and passion of a lot of people. Quick applause for the board, if you don't mind. Does anyone on Polymarket have the over-under for applause? I just want to check for this event. No? Okay. So I want to take this opportunity to thank a few people. First of all, our donors, our top donors, Richie Battle, Randy and Lisa Cohn, Ellen and Linwood Dame, Elizabeth Galvin, Mary and Robert Haft, Nancy Seaman and Alan Schwartz, and Beth Wilkinson and David Gregory. And I also want to thank our festival co-chairs, Mary Haft and Sara DiVello, we've heard from. And I also want to thank my partner in crime, without whom we'd have no festival, our administrative director, Chrissy Brown. And I don't know if you saw all the people, the wonderful people in red shirts out there doing yeoman's work, the volunteers. They were all managed by another volunteer, an incredible volunteer, Amy Etheridge. She's here somewhere. What person volunteers for that role? That's what I want to know. I don't understand it. And last but not least, it is my great pleasure to introduce the president of the Nantucket Book Foundation, creator of Tim Talks Books, and maybe the hardest working person on Nantucket, the incomparable Tim Ehrenberg.
Here we are, it's year 15. I can't believe the authors we've seen. 2026 this year is the same. It gives me such joy to call them by name. All the way from Rockefeller Center, we have Read with Jenna's Jenna Bush Hager. She wants us to hear 1,000 voices. Emma, Juliet, and Shannon write of love and our choices. And I don't know how we will ever match it, but guess who's here? The beloved Ann Patchett. Welcome back to the festival, Mitchell S. Jackson. His book's looking fly with all his basketball fashion. Angela Flournoy's here with 5 girlfriends over the years. John Valiant writes of fire weather and climate change fears. Take a trip to the Buckeye State with Patrick Ryan. Book a flight to Lake Como with Adriana Trigiani flying. Don't miss Belle Burden's buzzy memoir, Strangers. It dives into marriage and heartbreak and all of those dangers. Dr. Bennett's poems look at our country, the we. Liaquat Ahmed takes us back to 1873. Rick Tulsky reports on an injustice to fight. Julian Noisecat reckons with surviving the night. A Baldwin biography by Nicholas Boggs. Paws up for Alice Hoffman and a book filled with dogs. Jamie Siminoff chiming in about The Ring. Fall under the magic of Marlin's Moon Witch, Spider King. It's a big year for Nantucket Island fiction. Julie, Kylie, Pam, and Jim speaking Melville's Moby Diction. Ruta Sepetys is debuting A Fortune of Sand, 1920s in Detroit with a plot so grand. Tayari Jones writes of mothers and daughters are kin. You'll feel like a cradle friend a few pages in. Julian Sancton sets sail and takes us to sea. Writing of pirates and treasures, so does Vanessa Riley. Richard Russo is the king of the small town story. Nora O'Donnell looks back to give women the glory. Isaac Fitzgerald walks the Johnny Appleseed Trail. Lois Romano tells Mary Todd Lincoln's tale. Laura Zigman dishes on an author weekend like ours. We have 32 writers, a constellation of stars. Kudos to Wendy for having the thought. Praise to Mary, whose drive can't be taught. Cheers to Adam and Chrissy, welcome aboard. Thanks to our donors so we can afford this weekend of books and laughter and tears. To your readers and writers, snaps for the past 15 years. Welcome to the Nantucket Book Festival presented by the Nantucket Book Foundation. I want to thank and echo Adam, Mary, and Wendy, and Sarah's words, and thank again our board of directors, our literary committee, our committee members, our volunteers, our sponsors and donors, and to all of you. I am thrilled to be celebrating the 15th annual Nantucket Book Festival. I also want to do one more round of applause for Adam and Chrissy. I am so impressed with the work that you have done. Neither of them have ever even been to one of our festivals, and somehow you crushed it. Thank you very much. For some reason, I've always been really interested in anniversary gifts, or the traditional gifts for anniversaries or annual celebrations. Maybe it's because I like gifts, but year 1 is paper, year 3 is leather, year 10 is aluminum, and year 15 is crystal. When I started thinking about tonight and this evening's celebration, I thought of the parallels between crystals and reading. For me, literature has always been a way for me to understand the world. After a really good book, everything seems a little bit more crystal clear. With crystals in mind, we have visionary authors, Tayari Jones, Julian Brave Noisecat, Patrick Ryan, and Ann Patchett, who will tell us through their own prisms how reading and writing informs and brightens their understanding of the world and each other, how literature can make everything a bit more crystal clear. To kick off the evening, it is my pleasure to introduce the author of one of my favorite books of the year so far. Tayari Jones is the author of 5 novels, including An American Marriage, which was an Oprah's Book Club selection, and also appeared on Barack Obama's summer reading list and his year-end roundup. It won the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and an NAACP Image Award, and has been published in 24 countries. Jones is a C.H. Candler Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory University and lives in Atlanta. Her latest novel is Kin. Published in February of this year, was also an Oprah's Book Club selection and New York Times bestseller. What will soon be crystal clear to you is Tayari Jones is just as entertaining on the stage as she is on the page. Please join me in welcoming Tayari Jones.
Thank you so much, everyone, for gathering here. It is always enriching to be around people who care about books because, as you know, all writers know, people are constantly telling you that, the novel is dead and no one reads anymore. But we do read, and we will continue to read, and we will teach our children to read. So I just think that we've gathered here to affirm one another, so I appreciate that. I'm not much of a speech giver. I'm more of a storyteller, and so I want to tell you a story about me, my mother, and a book. When I was a little girl, it's no surprise, I loved to read. I read all the time. I had lots of books. That's one thing that my parents gave, whatever I wanted from the bookstore I could have. And I had lots and lots of books. And I was always reading things. But I should also tell you that part of my personality as a child is that I was always losing things. I was always getting in trouble for, not being careful, for being, my mother would just say the word careless, like such an insult, like you're just careless. Well, I had a book that I was very much into. It was a Judy Blume book. I was in the 5th grade, and I was reading my book, and I really was paying attention to what I was doing. I just had a lot going on, and I couldn't find it. I could not find the book. I looked all over for it. I went back to the cafeteria, no book, couldn't find the book. And I looked across a classroom, and there was another child reading my book. I know it was mine because there was a tear in the cover, and there she was. She was reading my book, and I just looked. I was not a confrontational child. I just looked. And I got home, I was so upset. My mother wanted to know what was wrong. And I said, Mommy, this little girl in my class, she stole my book. And my mother said, children are stealing books? I was like, yes, it happened to me, yes. And I was so upset, but she didn't seem to match the level of urgency, but parents are mysterious. So I suggested maybe we should call the police, and she said, no. So I went back to school the next day, and I could see from where the little girl was in the book, she had made a lot of progress in the book. She was further along in the book than I had been, which meant she knew plot developments that I didn't even know, and it was my book. I was just so upset, and she was sitting alone because she was a little girl that a lot of kids didn't play with. She was very quiet, and her clothes, were always kind of worn, and she just was always by herself. But she had stolen my book. And so then my mother came to school, and I was so happy. I was like, Mom, my mommy always comes through in the clutch. Here she is. We're about to settle this. So my mother came, and she spoke to the teacher, and the teacher called me in the hallway, and the little girl, her name was Octavia. She called Octavia in the hallway, and my mother came, and they took us into the teacher's lounge. It's a very mysterious place. I was a little disappointed, and I was a little shocked because, teachers are always saying, oh, you have to keep your cubby clean, keep things organized. That teacher's lounge was a mess. This was in the 70s, so there were ashtrays in there, half-empty cans of Tab. But there we were, me, Mommy, and Octavia, and my mother said, Octavia, did you take Tayari's book? And Octavia said, no, ma'am, I found a book. It was in the cafeteria, but it didn't have anybody's name on it. And my mother said, well, Octavia, just because, and then she looked over at me, some people are very careless with their things. You can't just take it just because you want it. It belonged to someone. You just didn't know whose it was because that person didn't write their name on it. And Octavia said, I'm sorry. And my mother said, I know you are. And, give Tayari back her book. And she offered the book, and I took it. And my mother said, Octavia, though, Mrs. Burleson tells me you are a very enthusiastic reader. And she smiled, and she said, I like to read. And my mother says, yes, and I'm very proud of you. And I was like, what's happening here? And then Octavia said, I used to get books from the library, but I was reading a book in the bathtub, and I dropped it, and it got damaged, and the librarian said I can't use the library until my mama pays $3, and my mama doesn't have money to pay for books. And my mother said, well, don't you worry. I'm going to speak to the librarian. And I was a little taken aback. And then, because I felt like, when you're little, they tell you the library is not a right, it's a privilege. And I was like, she's been reading books in the bathtub. I was just done. And then my mother went into her purse and took out a brown bag from B. Dalton. I don't know if y'all remember B. Dalton. It was a B. Dalton book. It was a bag, it was folded over, and my mother opened the B. Dalton bag, and there was a brand new book in there. And my mother gave her the new book, and Mommy said, well, this is a book for you so that you can start a library at home. When the books you own, that's your private library, and this could be a book for your private library. And the little girl was like, thank you, Mrs. Jones. And I was like, what? I am clearly the victim here. And so we went back to class, and Octavia was just smiling. I was just mad. I went home. I was so mad when we got home. I didn't want to talk to my mother. I didn't want to eat my dinner. I didn't want any of it. And so I did what anyone does in such a situation. I told my daddy what had happened. And I said, and so Mama gave her a book. And he smiled at my mother. I was like, what is happening here? He smiled at her, and she smiled. It was kind of like flirting. She smiled back. And then I said, but, and Daddy said, you have so many books. And I said, but she stole my book. And my father, he ate his food. I was still complaining I wouldn't eat. And then finally he said to me, I said, but you don't understand. I was robbed. And Daddy said, what are you, a Republican? So the school ended as school does. It was the end of the year, and that was the end. Our school was over at the 5th grade. I went on to another school. I didn't think that much more about it. Years later, as you all know, I became a writer, and I went on my very first book tour. And I will tell you, there is nothing more humbling than one's first book tour. I had given a reading in Atlanta at the public library, and 7 people came. And they were lured because there was going to be free snacks afterwards. But there I was signing the little stock that was there. And a few people were there. Now a woman came up, and she was, wearing a skirt and blouse. And she said, you're the author? And I said, yes. And she introduced herself, and she said that she was Octavia. She said, I knew you in elementary school. And I said, oh, yes. And she said, I was over it. I promise I was completely over it. And she said, please tell your mother that you saw me, and please tell her that I work here. I'm a librarian. And she said, you didn't know it, but you have the best mother. And it took me a long time to really understand that in so many ways. My mother is be 85 tomorrow, and I have to say, Octavia was right. Thank you.
Such a beautiful story. Tayari shared on Late Night with Seth that she was kidnapped in Martha's Vineyard. So I promised her that wouldn't happen on this island, so no one get any ideas. Julian Brave Noisecat is a writer and filmmaker, a member of the Canham Lake Band Chess Ken. Noisecat's first book, We Survived the Night, a national bestseller, was published by Knopf, Penguin Random House Canada, and Profile Books. It is currently a finalist for the Penn John Kenneth Galbraith Award for nonfiction. His first documentary, Sugarcane, directed alongside Emily Casey, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, where it won the directing award in the U.S. documentary competition. The film was recognized with dozens of awards, including Best Documentary from the National Board of Review, and was nominated for an Academy Award. In a Democracy Now! Interview, Julian Brave Noisecat stated, "We tell our stories so that no one forgets that we are still here. Our very existence works as a larger narrative for liberation, freedom, and peace. With books like We Survived the Night and voices like Julian's, it's crystal clear we won't forget." Please join me in welcoming Julian Brave Noisecat.
I can't believe I have to follow that. A long time ago. Not right now, son. Our ancestor, the trickster coyote, was in need of some advice. Now, when I say the trickster coyote, I need you to understand who I'm talking about. He's got more than one baby mama, a decade plus of unpaid taxes. He's sitting down at the Spouter Inn next to Ishmael, telling him about his Indian nephew, the one who really did whale Moby Dick. That's the trickster coyote. Now, the coyote was wandering the world, lost. And so the Creator thought, I need to help my brother out. And so he came down to earth, and he gave him the shkay, and he gave it to Coyote, and Coyote held it in his paws, and for once in his life, Coyote knew what to do. He wasn't lost anymore. All he needed was to pick up that shkay, and he knew where to go, and he knew what to create. Because you need to understand something about that coyote. Before that time, when the coyote would create something, and I'm sorry for saying this in a church, but the church is the one that took these stories away, so I don't feel that bad about it. Coyote would pop a squat, and then he'd consult the end result to figure out what he had to do, because that coyote, he's full of it. And so some time elapsed, and the coyote was a wanderer no more, a trickster no more. But then nature called. And he wandered off into the bush. He popped a squat. He set down that shkay, and he forgot to pick it up. And ever since then, my ancestors have maintained that the native people did not keep our ability to read and write. It was because the coyote lost that shkay. And in our language, shkay, it means paper. And it also means rights. Because without that paper that says that this land is yours, that your people came from so-and-so or such and such, that this here is yours and that nobody has the right to take it from you, well, you're kind of SOL, no? I learned this story not the traditional way, by the ear. I learned it because when I set out to write my book, We Survived the Night, I had to research my own people's oral histories that go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Some of them stretch all the way back 11,000 years ago to the first formation of the first rivers in what is now British Columbia, Canada, to the ascent of those rivers by the first salmon. That's thousands of years older than the pyramids, thousands of years older than the Bible. And it's almost gone, that tradition. Today, we are living amidst a moment when we might be transitioning back to orality. If you read the statistics, it says that all of us now are kind of like that coyote. We're letting go of the paper. We're letting go of the reading. And so it's actually a very interesting time to be studying oral cultures. I don't know about you, but every time I pick up my phone, someone's not usually reading something to me. Sometimes they're yakking their head off the way that our people did, our entire species did for thousands and thousands of years before this little blip in literacy that we're living through right now. And as the contrarian in this group of authors that I'm not qualified to be sitting with at the first pew here, I wanted to impress upon you the power and strength of oral traditions. I don't think we should fear the transition to orality. My people were able to maintain histories that archaeologists are just now confirming through scientific means. Oral traditions are not to be trifled with. At the same time, I want to make the case for a marriage between the written and the oral tradition. You see, when I'm trying to figure out my words, when I'm trying to research and understand my people's past that was ripped from us cruelly, I often have to read. When I'm trying to sharpen my point, I often have to write. And so perhaps, as we transition back to orality, the way that our species has lived for the vast majority of our existence, we shouldn't be afraid. But we could also use a bit of guidance from the written, literate tradition that I assume all of us in this beautiful church love and appreciate. And at the very least, I hope you guys keep buying books, because I'm 33, and I got at least 30 years worth of work left in me before they're gonna let me retire. Kukshechel, thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Patrick Ryan's novel Buckeye is a New York Times bestseller and international bestseller. From the very first sentence, Cal Jenkins was born in the spring of 1920 with one leg shorter than the other. It was crystal clear to me that I was going to be reading my favorite book of 2025, and it was. Patrick is a born storyteller. He is also the author of the story collections The Dream Life of Astronauts and Send Me. His work has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, the anthology Tale of Two Cities, and elsewhere. The former associate editor of Granta, he is the editor-in-chief of the literary magazine One Story. He lives in New York City, but here with us today, please welcome Patrick Ryan.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you for putting up with all of my emails and all of my questions over the last, I don't know how many months. And thank you, everybody, for being here. When I was in 7th grade, I had one class period where I was assistant to one of my teachers, and he sent me on regular runs to the school library. I would return whatever materials he used for class and pick up whatever he'd requested from the librarian. Whenever I went in, there was a boy sitting off by himself reading at one of the round tables. One day I went over and asked him why he got to hang out in the library by himself for an hour every day. He said that that hour would have been his gym class, but he'd been born with a serious heart condition and could die if his heart rate got up too high. So instead of having gym, he sat in the library and read for an hour each day. I thought he was the luckiest boy in the world. Not only because I hated gym class, but because by then I was already well on my way to understanding that reading was saving me. It was pulling me away for whole stretches of time from the hell that was junior high, from having to watch my parents not speak, from having to think about how with each passing day I was fitting in a little less. Because, you see, while I'd been a Boy Scout and was trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, I was also skinny, uncoordinated, timid, skittish, introverted, meek, morose, pimply, seething, scared, gay, and in Florida. Yes, I'm using in Florida as a state of being. I needed all the means of escape I could get my hands on. I was not living in a happy home. I was a terrible student, but I read and read. No one was supervising my reading, and it was great. I always had a library book going, and every week I would walk into the "what are the chances of this coming up twice?" B. Dalton's with my allowance, and I would choose a book by the cover. I read classics and trash side by side with no idea that there was any difference. According to my diary, the summer I was 16, I read To Kill a Mockingbird, The Thornbirds, the novelizations of Herbie Rides Again and The Cannonball Run, Flowers in the Attic, Petals on the Wind, The Grass Harp, The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank, Scruples, all 8 of the John Jakes Kent Family Chronicles, A Separate Piece, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Spy Who Loved Me, Fonzie's Dilemma, and Junkie Priest. Junkie Priest I found in my parents' room, just saying. Reading opened my brain to a world of stories and all the different ways that they could be told. It opened my brain to the fact that there was a world out there that warranted all these stories, a world that had no choice but to make these stories. And a big part of how I got through adolescence was that I started to aim for that world. It was no surprise that writing, when I started doing it as a teenager, was also a means of escape. I wrote stories from the point of view of animals, stories about detectives and murderers and submarine captains. I wrote a whole sequel to Star Wars, not a screenplay, but a novel. And then I wrote to George Lucas and offered to let him read it and use it, provided he give me full credit and pay me. I did not hear back, but I kept writing. In high school, my English teacher would assign us a one-page vignette each week. She'd say, go out and observe people, write descriptions of what they're doing, and put in some dialogue. Write a one single-page vignette. I would come to class with 10. I was like Hamilton writing the Federalist Papers. All my classmates were annoyed with me. I was not a good student, though. I wanted to read and write, not learn. The result being that I got a 750 on my SAT. If you're wondering, was that the verbal or the analytical? The answer is, They actually gave the SAT to a turnip once, and it scored higher than a 750. I was turned down by every state school I applied to. Escape, by then, had evolved from making it out of junior high to getting the hell out of my hometown. And I saw my means of escape dwindling fast, because the only good excuse I had to go anywhere and not stay on Merritt Island, Florida, and work in the Orange Julius until I was 30 was college. After I begged them, my parents drove me 6 hours to Tallahassee, and I got an appointment with the director of admissions, and I sat in his office and said, Dr. Matarko, I am more than an SAT score. I am this stack of short stories. I'm this essay on the Outsiders, and I'm the literary magazine that I edit for my high school. Well, he was not made of stone. He said that he could let me in provisionally, but only if I retook the SAT and got my score up to the bare minimum, which was 950. And even I knew that was 200 points higher than I had gotten before. So I studied and studied and studied, and I retook the test. I've never told this story to an audience before. Every word of it's true. I retook the test. You know, they mailed you your score, and when you opened it up, it was 2 different numbers. They didn't give you the total. And I was with a friend of mine, and I said, I can't even look. Just open it up and add them. And he opened it up, and he added them together. And I said, just tell me the number. And he said, 950. Hey, has any room of people ever applauded a 950 on the SAT? That's awesome. I would have been telling this story for years if I'd known it. A minute later, I was on the phone with the secretary of the director of admissions of Florida State University. She said that Dr. Matarko was in a meeting. I said, tell him it's Patrick Ryan. Tell him I retook the SAT. Tell him I got a 950. She put me on hold for what felt like a long time. When she came back, she was laughing a little, and she said, he said to tell me, congratulations, I was going to college. And I went on to prove everyone's hesitation to be absolutely justified by getting C's and D's in everything but English. But I got out. I'm the only person who has this particular story, but every reader I know has this story of how books saved them and continue to save them. And every writer I know has a story about how writing some particular piece was like a lifeline that was thrown to them. I wouldn't have gotten out of my hometown, which makes it sound a little like a prison. I know it wasn't, it was just Florida. I wouldn't have gotten out of there, I wouldn't have gotten out of who I was there if it weren't for books. I certainly wouldn't be here today if it weren't for our shared compulsion to understand ourselves better by reading one another's stories. And I can't think of anything more worthy of celebrating on the 15th anniversary of the Nantucket Book Festival, so thank you for letting me be a part of it.
So charming, Patrick, thank you. To close our evening, we have who I like to call my literary fairy godmother. When you say Ann Patchett's name to a group of readers, their shoulders relax, they smile. It's a name that de-stresses. Are you familiar with the saying that people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you made you feel? It's crystal clear that Ann Patchett, through the power of words, makes us feel a little bit better about the world. To be completely honest, I have a little crush on Ann Patchett. It's not a creepy crush. It's more like I'd like to replace Patrick Ryan as her best friend, but don't think that's going to happen. Ann Patchett is the author of novels, most recently the #1 New York Times bestseller, Whistler. Works of nonfiction and children's books. She has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the PEN/Faulkner, the Women's Prize for Fiction in the UK, and the Book Sense Book of the Year. Her novel, The Dutch House, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Her work has been translated in more than 30 languages, and Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. President Biden awarded her the National Humanities Medal in recognition of her contributions to American culture. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where she is the owner of Parnassus Books. Please join me in welcoming the beloved Ann Patchett.
I want to tell you something funny while Tim's here. I wrote a speech to give to you. I'm going to take my watch off. Don't let me forget it.
Okay.
And it turned out to be the same one that you just gave. At the beginning.
Oh, really?
When you go through all the authors, I didn't rhyme in
Okay.
mine, but that's what it was. It was unbelievably clever. Thank you.
We're never going to be best friends now.
So I think this is just going to go fine, but I'm shifting to plan B. How books saved my life. All right, so yes, I too was a bookish kid with not great grades who read all the time and believed that a book was the magic carpet. I'm not choking because I'm moved. I get just allergies. Was the magic carpet that would take me out of my life. All right, put a pin in that. In 2010, all the bookstores in Nashville closed. I didn't want to open a bookstore. I had never really enjoyed being in bookstores. As an adult, as a novelist, I always said that being in a bookstore for me was like being a rabbit in a shooting gallery. I felt extremely hunted whenever I was in a bookstore. But the bookstores were gone, and someone had to do something about it. And so I decided, along with a complete stranger I had just met, that I would open a bookstore. To say that I didn't give this any thought would be the understatement of my life. And to say that even if I had given it thought, there were so many things that I didn't know. For example, do you know that there has to be a person who gives all of their financials to all of the publishing houses in order to establish a line of credit so that you can get the books? That was a real surprise. I had to put my house up in order to get a line of credit from HarperCollins, who publishes my books. Then, when my partner and I were having a meeting with our landlord, we have a bookstore in a strip mall. We're right between Sherwin-Williams Paint and Fleet Feet Shoes. And we're sitting in a conference room, and we're signing all of the contracts so that we can rent the store. I also had to give them all my financials because, by the way, this is a talk about money. Because it turns out that I had to guarantee the rent for 5 years from whatever month we were on. And I said to my landlord, does that mean that, and he said, well, you know, if the business goes bust, you can sublet it to some other business and cover your rent. And I said, yeah, but what if we go to war with North Korea and nobody wants to rent this place in Brookside Village between Sherwin-Williams Paint and Fleet Feet running shoes? I have to pay the rent on an empty store for 5 years? And he said, yes. Okay, so these are all of the things that I didn't know. Oh, the things I didn't know could go on forever. But we opened the store and it did okay, and we expanded. Well, we originally built in Tan 2000. You haven't lived until you've chipped out 20 tanning pods that were made of tile. They took the tanning beds out, but they left us the pods. Anyway, 5 years after that, we moved into Pickles and Ice Cream Maternity so that we could expand. That's when COVID hit. Okay, so the store is closed. Everybody's store is closed. And I have a staff of people that I love. They are mine. I am responsible for them. And I can only figure out one thing that's going to save us, and that's books. Not in that romantic way of writers dreaming of a grand life, but in the way of a woman who realizes that if this thing goes down, she's going to have to pay the rent on it for 5 years. And her house is on the line. So we had to get really creative really fast. And the first thing that happened is the vast majority of the staff left because they didn't feel comfortable coming into the store even though we were closed. And we made the decision that we would pay everyone regardless of whether or not they decided they felt comfortable working. So at the end of the day, there were 6 of us. And we would stay in that store until 3 o'clock in the morning packaging up books. We would do every single thing we could think of in order to stay open. My least favorite idea that I ever came up with in my life was a Mother's Day plot in which I said that I would pick out your mother's Mother's Day present and I would write your mother a Mother's Day card. Just tell me how much you want to spend. 250 people signed up. I wrote 250 Mother's Day cards, and I picked out all the books, and together we stayed and wrapped all of the boxes. The thing that I was most worried about then was the debut author. and the idea that if John Grisham or Stephen King was going to publish a book, everybody would know about it. But what would happen to the debut author? Because no one was able to come into a bookstore and browse. And so we decided to start a video series called the Laydown Diaries, because I'm sure, as you know, all books are published on Tuesday. So every Tuesday, I would stand there with the staff who felt like coming into work, and we would hold up the books that were coming out that day and talk about them. In the early iteration of that series, I wore either a ball gown or a cocktail dress every week in hopes of furthering the interest in whatever book it was. And it turns out that the thing in this world that I am really, really good at is not writing. The thing that I'm really good at is selling. And holding a book up next to my head and saying, my favorite book of the year is Kin by Tayari Jones. It's the story of two young girls who find friendship as they move through their life into adulthood, taking separate paths that pull them apart and bring them ultimately back together. I mean, I can flat sell. And we then had so many online orders that we had to move our little bitty shipping. I mean, we used to sell like 12 books a week online. We moved it into the front of the store because it didn't matter. There was nobody in the store. We were closed. People could call from the parking lot and we would mask up and run out. Do you remember this? And pop the trunk and throw the book in? And we were like Santa's workshop. We just went around the clock. Eventually, we had to open again, and our online shipping business was so enormous that we had to rent an office suite next to a dentist so that we had a place to fulfill the orders. The point of this story is, as I put my father's watch back on, there are all sorts of ways that books can save your life. And it can be beautiful and artistic and deep and profound. And it can also be commerce. And commerce, listen, it's a beautiful thing to be an independent bookseller and to have a staff of people who are your family, people who you would love and do anything in the world to make sure that they are safe. Support everything local. It's so important, not just for the people running the business, but for the people working in these businesses. It's life-changing, it's community-changing, and it's the backbone of who we are as a country. And the book, in fact, can be that magic carpet that saves your life in ways you never expected. Thank you.
Keep the applause going for all of our speakers, Tayari Jones, Julian Brave Noisecat, Patrick Ryan, and Ann Patchett. Thank you. Thank you for celebrating our 15th annual festival. We will see you again tomorrow at the Methodist Church at 9 a.m. for another full day of lineup. And please have a beautiful night and happy reading. Thank you.